You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 30 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. If you're a new listener to the show, you can follow us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast and also connect with us on Facebook, facebook.com/Social Media and Politics Podcast. Now, there's been a lot of questions raised recently about the role of big social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and how they're to monitor and moderate their content. And we've seen this in a number of examples. So one example is Facebook and Facebook Live and whether they should censor things like police shootings that we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen also an increased amount of calls for Twitter, Facebook, Google to monitor fake news. And these types of controversies bring into question, what does free speech mean when it comes to digital and social media? What is the role of social networking providers in terms of what they should and should not censor? And there's been a lot of controversy also around Twitter with banning certain accounts and charges labeled against them for favoring certain political opinions over others. We've seen that also with Facebook and its trending news feature, which was shut down after allegations that it had been suppressing right-wing news and favoring left-wing news. And even Reddit and its various subreddits have been accused of shutting down links and commentary related to the Pizzagate scandal, which is something that was from the past U.S. election. And so all this brings into question the role of moderators, the role of censorship, and the role of free speech in a digital age. So enter Gab. Gab is a social networking platform. It's a startup with about 200,000 users, and it's been described as a hybrid between Twitter and Reddit. So you can send a Gab, which is a 300-character message that supports all certain types of multimedia, like Twitter. You can reply or repost a Gab, but there's also that upvote and downvote feature that's been very much popularized by Reddit. But what's interesting is Gab makes a point not to censor the content on their site insofar as it's not certain things like child pornography or terrorism or, explicit intent to harm somebody. But for the most part, a lot of things that would be shut down on Twitter or Facebook is allowed on Gab. And this has led to a lot of commentators saying that Gab is a harbor for the alt-right. Apple, for instance, has refused to accept Gab and its iOS service for smartphones because its content has been seen by some as objectionable. But the creators of Gab have a different story to tell. So I wanted to get their take and understand a little bit more about what this Gab platform is, what it's all about, and what its kind of niche is in this larger social media marketplace. So joining me now to talk more about Gab is Utsav Sanduja. He's Gab's Chief Communications Officer and Global Corporate Affairs Director. Utsav, thanks so much for taking the time and welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor and great privilege to be on your show. And I really appreciate this chance to explain our company in greater detail.
You got it. So why don't we go ahead and start out with just that? Can you give our listeners an overview to Gab? Like, what's the idea behind the platform and how is it different from other social networks?
So Gab is a micro-blogging social media, social networking site that allows for 300 characters, that allows users to elongate and really explain their points of view, perspectives, and content. And it is a site based on the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and promotes free speech without censorship, without any type of curation and restrictions. Gab is also a vehicle for social change in that we allow people that are trying to dissent in their respective countries, engage in lawful political dissent, the opportunity to have a platform. And more critically, it's to support independent artists, it's to support independent entertainers, musicians, philosophers. without the use of big corporations, advertising agencies, and anything that involves us with venture capitalists, of which we abstain from completely. We are a crowd-funded, community-oriented platform.
Right. And so a friend recently told me about Gab. So I've only been on the platform for about a week and kind of poking around. And so if any of our listeners want to follow the podcast on Gab, it's at SMMP Podcast. And it seems from what I see on the platform so far, and also what I've been reading online, is that the controversy around Twitter shutting down or banning accounts is kind of driving people to Gab, or that seemed to be something that was talked about a lot on the platform. Has that controversy of Twitter shutting down accounts been a key part of Gab since the beginning, or something that has come about in light of recent controversies?
Well, the interesting thing is, Andrew Torba, our CEO, was working in Silicon Valley for a long time, and he had observed on a personal scale how fellow employees, friends of his in the community that had small c conservative views, libertarian views, views that were not necessarily left-leaning, were getting either let go in their jobs, they were facing discrimination. Mr. Torba had also witnessed that Facebook had been curating and censoring and suppressing conservative news. Reddit had been shutting people out from their site, censoring the Donald forum. He had witnessed Twitter banning accounts left and right for often more than not arbitrary reasons, locking accounts. Even Gab's account on Twitter was locked. And the thing is, like, Gab was started, because of all the censorship that was going on. And as time went further, Twitter continued on this path. Reddit doubled down like crazy, as we all know what was happening in the news, where they admitted that they straight up curate content. We noticed that YouTube was randomly, arbitrarily demonetizing videos simply because they disagreed with their politics and unsubscribing people from certain accounts. Facebook was going around and declaring things as fake news. Same with Google. And Gab's success has not just been about, our independent views, our innovations that we've created in tech, which I can elongate and go into detail later in the podcast. But really, the overall tech world has been going on this massive social justice warrior drive in banning people. And it's becoming very like a revolution gone wrong.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me that I'm glad you mentioned all these networks, because I want to ask a little bit about the features and functionality of Gab, and we'll come back to all these other issues you just raised. But giving an idea of what Gab is to our listeners, it has a kind of Twitter feel to it. You're limited to 300 characters. There's the hashtag feature, but then you also have this up and down vote that's been popularized by Reddit. And, an upvote kind of acts as a like that you might see on Facebook or Twitter. So can you go a bit into when you were developing the platform from the back end? Like, how did you decide what features to include, and how did you decide to build its functionality?
So basically, on Gab, we observed all the social media sites and what were the chief complaints of each. And what we decided to do was, we said to ourselves, banning people, censoring people, blocking people, these are very ineffectual. They do not do anything in regards to actually changing minds. They don't do anything in actually giving users control. Like, for example, if you block somebody, they come back with another account and come back to harass you, for example. Or you'll have bullies on the internet who will get blocked, and then they'll say, oh, look, this person had blocked me. Look how much of a troll I am. And they celebrate. So in Gab, what we did was we said, look, the best way forward in allowing dissent and disagreement is a mute feature. And this mute feature allows a user to turn off somebody's posts that are being sent to them. And the user on the other end won't even know if they're muted. And they won't even have that kind of artificial block that would otherwise be contentious to certain people. We also moved towards the upvote, downvote model because instead of censorship, we believe that a global community can collectively make decisions independently of whether or not a content is good, bad, etc. And by giving it ratings similar to, say, Yelp, you're able to allow dissent without shutting people down. And so the significance of that is Gab very much follows the liberal democratic ethos, which is, you're allowed to disagree with others, but you can't overstep your rights and destroy somebody and shut them down. You have to allow all ideas to be exchanged freely, so long as you are not intruding in someone else's right to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the philosophy that we took from this. We followed John Milton's work, one of the great peoples in the Glorious Revolution in England who supported free speech. We took the works of the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers. We took a lot of the principles from the Glorious Revolution of 1689. We took a lot of free speech principles that have been known in history, and really incorporate that as our company's backbone. And our technology and our features are all really much predicated on individual control, individual censorship or self-censorship, as we like to call it, individual curation, giving power to the users, not having some administrator sit back and be like, okay, this is offensive to this community, censor this person, shut them down.
Right. And it's kind of an interesting feature, I think. You put that power into the hands of the individual. So you can mute, another user, but you can also mute by hashtag, right?
Yes. So the other thing we have on Gab is we actually invented this before Twitter came out with this. So not only can you mute users, but yes, you can mute hashtags. You can mute even words that you don't even like. So if, for example, you don't want to see a particular topic, you can just enter that word in and it will be self-censored. If you don't want to, for example, read stuff about sports, you can censor that for yourself. If you feel like there is hate speech and you believe that this is hate speech, because everyone's morality is very subjective and different, you can put in those words that you deem as hate speech. And because we recognize that everyone has different politics, philosophical views, backgrounds, cultures, religions, we don't think that a all-encompassing model of censorship works. We recognize that the human mind, the neural pathways of the human mind are so complex and that not everyone's upbringing is the same. So by allowing users to censor topics and words and hashtags and users, it allows for that subjectiveness and individuality. And individuality for us is very important here on Gab.
Yeah. And so if we go back to that Twitter controversy, it was a lot about banning accounts. And then with Facebook, it was about banning accounts, but it was also about the Facebook trending and what news they were promoting, that they were kind of shutting down conservative sites. But, even on Gab, it's there's a lot of things going on. You have different topical, almost subreddits, but there is a kind of main algorithm driven feed in the beginning, which I'm sure is based on, users you subscribe to and also, what you're upvoting and downvoting. I mean, so what's the criteria behind the algorithms that are curating that main feed?
So basically, upvoting is one consideration. Topics that are popular of the day, like breaking news stories, and categories that are heavily discussed, certain feeds that are being engaged with in the community overall, where there's high levels and high activity of user engagement. So either on a particular topic, a particular content creator, a particular subject. So there's many things that goes into that process. But what we do on Gab is, and this is what makes us very different. So for example, on Twitter, if you're a celebrity, you tend to get much more attention. But in Gab, if you're an average person that just happens to have fantastic ideas, like say a philosophical topic, say a drawing or a painting, say your own music or a product or merchandise, and if that is well received by the community and genuinely is very popular, then that tends to show up more. So what this does is it allows for a true democratic model on Gab. where it is devoid of, classicism. So where someone on Twitter is very rich and affluent and they get seen first. On Gab, we don't really have class. We don't really have notoriety. We don't really have who can pay and shell out the most. We don't have whose political views are the most correct. No, for us, it's about, can an individual produce their own great content? And if yes, then they'll get the most votes. It's very democratic.
Right, which also goes to that idea that it's ad-free and community-powered in terms of kind of grassroots supporting the network. And I mean, I haven't been on the platform long enough. Are there public pages like on Facebook where marketers would set up, or can institutions set up a different type of profile? Are they all the same?
So the thing about Gab that makes us so excellent is that we don't discriminate. So how our model works is this. So let's say you are a well-known persona or brand. You can apply for verification. Now, we tend to give our donors first access to getting verified first because, people that are willing to pay for our product, part of our great revenue model, will obviously get those rewards and perks. But then also, if a user wants to genuinely put their real name out there, we will also give them a check mark and verification. And that allows for people to distinguish whether it's like a troll account, anonymous account, and a real human being. If a company, institution, organization wants to get verified and the check mark, they can apply through our support and go through the applicable channels. And what this does is it gives them that kind of veneration and respect and well-knownness amongst the community. Donors that donate will also get badges. They will get all types of recognition on our site. And people that donate to Gab are actually funding a great institution and cause that's championing free speech in all parts of the world, whether they are liberal democracies or authoritarian dictatorships.
Yeah, and before we go further, I wanted to just clarify, because it was something that I read about just recently, was that Gab just became open to the public.
Yes.
As of last month, right? It was
Yep.
It was in beta and invite only. Can you talk about kind of the development and where you're at now?
Sure. So Gab initially had a waitlist system, and that was because as a new startup, and just to let your viewers know, we're only about 10 months old only. When we started our site, we had to control the number of users that were coming because it was very costly from a back-end perspective, and it was affecting our servers. Now that we have grown in terms of community donations, of which we are very grateful to the community, now that we have Gab Pro memberships, which allows users to get more perks, now that we are getting much more attention and growth, we are able to open the site to the entire public. So people can view Gabs publicly. They can view public accounts publicly. They can view Gab TV publicly. They can view a lot of the verified accounts publicly, and that gives marketers, corporations, small businesses, independent artists, individuals, institutions, all types of organizations from civil society, the right to be out there in the public and share views, whether or not they're controversial.
Which is a great lead into my next question, which is about the access to data on Gab. Is there an open API or plans for one?
So we are working on an API, and we have a major announcement coming up this summer. But part of the reason why we haven't just announced and jumped out with an API is because we want to really vet who gets access. We don't want our software to be abused. We don't want our software to, say, be hijacked by somebody with malicious intent or criminality. We don't want it to be smeared. So, our site is opening up itself more and more and more. And as we innovate in our technology, as we get great with encryption technology, as we get more advanced in our backend features, we will be opening up APIs, and there will be an announcement this coming summer.
Cool, because that was one of the things I was thinking about. If the guiding principle for the platform is free speech, then free speech should be something that is out there and open and accessible.
Absolutely.
Whereas on other platforms, we've seen steps to limit access from governments, from researchers, from civil society organizations. But if free speech is the platform, then that should be completely out there. I mean, unless up to the user to censor it themselves.
Well, this is why Gab exists. And this is what we try to tell people who are of the far left or social democratic persuasion. Gab actually opposes classicism. Gab actually opposes multinational big corporations. We are not a site ran on advertisements catering to big industries and lobbyists. We're not a site capitulating to venture capitalists. In fact, we don't take any venture capitalist funding. We don't take subsidies from governments or hybrid corporation governments. And we are all ran by users. And this is what we try to explain, that Gab truly is for everyone. And we are genuinely trying to build an organization, a platform, an institution, a social networking site that really caters to democracy in its purest form.
And that's interesting in light of there's been some controversy with Apple, right? And in terms of
Yes.
you guys being able to have mobile access. Can you tell us the backstory on that?
Absolutely. So Apple is a very hilarious company. I would like to tell your viewers. And if Apple is listening, I find you a joke, Apple computers, because, Apple started out as this amazing organization led by the great, illustrious Steve Jobs, who wanted to promote, artistic diversity. He wanted to bring artistic concepts to tech, individuality. Apple had a lot of great years behind it in promoting human rights, for example, in China. They had many, many great years of encouraging philanthropy and charity and empowerment. And Gab fully supports that kind of thinking. But as Apple grew hungry with money and became really political, we started to observe that Apple ended up picking and choosing who could come on their App Store. Apple has rejected Gab 9 times in a row. Part of the rejections included things like Gab is, quote unquote, a hate speech, mean-spirited site that engages in xenophobia, engages in bullying, engages in all kinds of speech that is discriminatory. And we think this is hilarious because if you go on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Snapchat, you'll see these social media sites are already on the App Store. And not only do those organizations and apps have hate speech, or whatever you define as hate speech, but there are reports of child pornography, terrorism. I was reading how ISIS was exchanging arms on Snapchat, how Al-Nusra Front was exchanging arms on Snapchat. We know of a major controversy of child pedophilia on Facebook that was uncovered by the BBC about 2 months ago. We know of so many examples of hardened neo-Nazis on Twitter, of criminal cells on Twitter. And here on Gab, we have had 0 incidents of such disgusting things. And yet our site, our app, gets rejected, whereas Android has readily accepted us. And Android allows us to have an app of which we are getting ratings of anywhere between 4.3 to 4.7 out of 5. So we believe that Apple is not taking a fair decision, rather a political decision. And they're acting like a corporate monopoly, as Ralph Nader talks about. So here on Gab, we're going to call out Apple's BS, because it is BS.
Mm-hmm. And I'm jumping around a little bit here, but how many users are on the platform?
Feel free to. So right now, Gab has roughly 181,000 users, and we will be approaching our 200,000 milestone very soon. About half of our user base comes from the continental United States, and then our second largest user base comes from the United Kingdom. Third would be Germany, 4th would be France, and 5th Canada. And we have a large user base from Japan, Brazil, and India, which my department has been working on. So I run our global affairs, and we have been blossoming in Europe, booming in the European Union. And because of these governments introducing draconian laws or social media sites trying to implement bizarre censorship laws. For example, we're witnessing here in Germany, well, not here in Germany. I'm not in Germany. I'm actually in Canada. But people who are listening in from Germany, Merkel's government is bringing forth some weird social media law that wants to fine social media sites for hate speech. And the Constitutional Court lawyers are looking at this, saying this may not necessarily be constitutional, and support for this bizarre law is falling in the country. The United Kingdom was considering a kind of like anti-hate speech social media site organization where they would like crack down on social media sites and implement a levy against hate speech. And now the government of Theresa May has now backed away from it and is looking at having a commission to analyze things. So we're already seeing that the user base in Europe is saying no to censorship and laws that are coming forward to crack down on censorship. And when we say censorship, we're not talking about exchange of arms, narcotics, child pornography. Gab opposes this. When we say censorship, we're saying, let's say you are critical of the migrant population or the culture of the migrants. You're getting thrown out of Facebook, or in the case of the user base of Germany, you're actually getting prosecuted. So users in Europe are saying no to this.
And that's something that was also I read about. I don't know if it was on your blog or somewhere else. That is actually the laws of how Gab operates in the States are different. Like Gab honors the regulations in place in Europe, right? How do you deal with that difference?
Yeah. So the thing is, so first I'll speak about the United States. So Gab is based on the First Amendment, which allows complete free speech, short of a couple of things. Recently the Supreme Court of the United States, in a 9-0 decision, said that even hate speech, whatever that means, is also free speech and is protected liberal democratic speech. So that's what Gab's all about. So now the thing is now that Gab has users from other jurisdictions that do not have these rights. We tell our user base, exercise all local laws of your countries, but do not just sit there and accept it. Protest within your democratic rights. Be proactive within your lawful democratic rights and challenge these laws and bring attention to these laws. Here on Gab, we're not an anarchist site. We're not encouraging unlawful activity, but we are saying to our user base around the world, take steps in pushing your governments, your civil organizations to stop this madness, because what it is doing is it is breeding extremism on the dark web and removing users from legal, viable public organizations like ours to more nefarious dark web criminal groups that have no restrictions and can't even be monitored properly.
Well, that's interesting because, and I know you get this question a lot, but from the interviews I've been reading about Gab, some commentators would associate Gab with the dark web or as a sort of facet of the quote unquote alt-right. And, I would say that having been using the platform, I see a lot. It's a grab bag of things. There's a memes section, there's a fitness section, and lifestyle, all types of things. But there definitely is a political discussion going on there. And I think just from looking at it objectively, this would be what the mainstream media at least would call being associated with that Bannon wing of the White House. Does this describe the average US user who's on Gab?
So it's a very good question, and I'm glad you brought this up because actually Gab has been getting a very unfair rap from the mainstream media. And, ever since Julian Assange and WikiLeaks has revealed the true political nature of all these major newspapers, companies, and organizations, we see that organizations like the New York Times, the Washington Post, organizations like CNN, of which we've also helped to uncover, are very left-wing and are very, very distinctively in support of globalism, cosmopolitanism, social justice warrior policies, um, multiculturalism, left-wing interpretations of economics, social views, um, and they are very much in this camp of really hard left political discourse, but are mendaciously putting themselves across as mainstream and objective. And what Gab has been doing is exposing this. And a lot of the organizations, such as the BBC, have been, I guess from our perspective, and we can't prove this, but from our point of view, we believe that these organizations don't like that we're calling out their BS. They don't like that we are exposing their donors, their paymasters, their editorial staff thinking. And we're getting all of this negative press simply because we are a global populist movement exposing the truth, and to quote the great Ali G, yo, for real, keeping it real. And that's what Gab is all about. Now, yes, it's true that we've had a number of content creators that are from the alt-right, the alt-light, and other communities. But you would also be surprised to know that we have members of Die Linke and members of the Green Party from Germany and the United States, the United Kingdom. We've had a number of anti-corporatist left. We have a number of agrarian farmer and populist groups from India that are social democratic on our site. We have had a significant number of users from Germany exposing Holocaust deniers who were banned on Twitter, bizarrely, join our site. We have a number of new media, left-leaning Bernie Sanders supporters on Gab in the United States. We even have Jeremy Corbyn supporters, even supporters of George Galloway on Gab. And what we're understanding is the mainstream center-left, I'm sorry to bash academia, liberal establishment groups, they're the ones running the show. These are the people that are supporting Justin Trudeau, Macron in France. These are the people supporting Hillary Clinton, what you would consider center-left, but very wealthy center-left groups.
Yeah, because I think what I noticed kind of that jumped out at me the most was more a sense of resistance. So like resistance imagery in terms of a lot of cartoons of patriots, a lot of resistance against the mainstream media, like you're saying, a lot of images about the Free Kekistan movement that came out of 4chan. And so I wanted to ask, do you have these maybe far right and far left groups kind of duking it out on the platform? I mean, do you think that the free speech aspect encourages people to confront one another and debate, or does the kind of mute feature keep people in their echo chambers?
So the thing is, this is the thing about Gab. Gab is such a free and loose site. It is truly a capitalist system of market exchange and individual tailorized user experiences. So if you want to debate, go ahead and do the debate. And we already have debating. There's some users, for example, that are very critical of certain economic policy. And if you go in our finance category, people are debating between, say, gold standard and central banking systems and various monetary policies. If you go in our philosophy section, you have people really debating nihilism, existentialism, and people really going into very hardcore depth about what is the meaning of life and is there such a meaning of life. We have regular debates of, does God exist? Then on the other end of the spectrum, we have people just muting users, muting words, muting content, and just wanting to share cute rabbit videos and talk about orchestra and the classics, or people talking about, hey, look at my big monster truck in West Virginia. Do you like my big giant rims? And, this is the thing about Gab. A lot of our users are everyday small business owners, manufacturing workers. We have a lot of veterans. We have a lot of retired police officers. We have a lot of mothers who have, lots of children. We have a lot of average middle class and working class people in our site. And that's what makes it so realistic, holistic. It's not a bunch of bots that you would see on 4chan and 8chan, or a lot of spam garbage on Twitter, or a bunch of progressive social justice warriors say on Reddit. No, you actually have average working class people on our site.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the question of bots because, Twitter, we don't know exactly how many bots, but I think it's safe to say at least 10% of the platform. So what about bots on Gab? Is it something that you've actively tried not to allow, or do you allow it through the back end, or what's the bot situation on Gab?
So the thing about bots is we don't stop users from joining, but what we do have is here on Gab, we have a no spam policy, and we do not tolerate spam posts. And to identify spam, we have a certain level of metrics of which we identify in our guidelines, which is very clear and pointed out. So posts that are repetitive, that are clearly pointing links out, this sort of thing isn't accepted on our site. And these users are given advisories, warnings, and if necessary, suspensions, although Gab almost never suspends users because everybody knows what Gab's all about. And we tend to have very good user behavior because it is very community oriented and community self-policed and self-regulated. And this model works so well without us having to have, thousands of moderators like Facebook does, where they're paying, a Filipino worker less than $1 a day, which we think is a human rights crime, or people being paid in India who may not necessarily be able to speak the language as a 10th generation Canadian or Briton or American. On Gab, what we have is, and that's not to speak ill of the people of India, and I love people of India, they're great. On Gab, what we do is we allow the users to go and do the self-curation. And when they see bots, these bots are getting massive downvotes and they're getting negative points. And people see that, this user is getting, negative 2,500 points. This is probably a bot. Stay away. And that poor bot, because it has so many negative votes, doesn't get any attention and loses relevance, and people ignore it. And this self-policing does the trick without us having to curate, ban, block, shut them down like Reddit does.
Interesting. So it's that the community that wants to be a part of Gab, agrees with the ideas behind Gab, is a very kind of active community.
Yes, exactly. And Gab really is a lot like a peer-to-peer service, only that it is bigger, more inclusive, not on the dark web, but rather on the actual legit regular web. We work with law enforcement. We work with all types of police agencies. We prohibit illegal activities. So we prohibit illegal narcotics, child pornography, calls to violence. We prohibit any behavior that may go against your local domicile or local jurisdiction. Gab supports Blue Lives Matter. We are very up in front about our support and respect for the great veterans. We, for example, those brave Belgian military officers who shot the terrorists in the train station, we commend their great patriotism. We commend the work of that brave police officer that was on BBC yesterday, how he had fought back against the terrorists who were knifing people on London Bridge. Here on Gab, we cooperate with police officers. We talk to them, try to make sure that we're within the ambit of the law. And that's the thing about Gab, is we are so pro-police, pro-law enforcement, that whatever the media paints on us is not just a lie, but a figment of their imagination.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting from an academic standpoint to think that, there's been a lot of controversy about Facebook moderation, curation, et cetera. And will this format, what implications does that have for democracy? I think it's super, super interesting. But a clarification question about bots. And I guess it would be more about fake news, which is obviously a big deal. I mean, is fake news or these kind of, stories that are created by, teenagers in Macedonia, for example, is that permitted on the site? Is that free speech?
So I can't speak to the Macedonian example because that's just, with due respect, that's just like, I guess, one case out of, I don't know, how many billions and billions and billions of pieces of information on the internet. So the thing about fake news is we actually find this very disturbing. So Gab TV, of which I run personally on Gab with our team, we actually uncovered fake news, or as I like to call it, stage news by CNN. What I was actually in London with our British content creators, and we saw news organizations partaking in trying to solicit Muslims in going on camera and trying to give their views on stories. And they were trying to basically put people on the camera and encourage them to speak about their narratives. It was uncovered recently, as you may have heard, certain staffers at CNN were fired for admitting that this whole Russian narrative about Trump doesn't exist and is BS. We are seeing more and more stories of journalists partaking with left-wing politicians pushing their talking points, their stories. We saw this in the controversy pertaining to the Democrats, where certain Democratic operatives were giving, Hillary Clinton and her staff talking points and questions ahead of time before debates. So we see all this madness, and WikiLeaks has covered a lot of this madness. So here on Gab, when people are saying this is fake news, we say to ourselves, well, excuse me, these mainstream organizations, air quotes, are the ones creating fake news themselves. They're engaging in propaganda. The Mic, which, for example, recently went after me personally for, there was some controversy many months ago where the Mic had accused me of engaging in a romantic affair with a journalist, which is complete nonsense. They cut and paste my emails in their exchange and put across their narrative. So we see that the media engages in stage news, not just fake news, but stage news. And we see Google doing the same thing where, there was a German user who was uncovering the number of migrant crimes, and Google had decided to dub it as fake news and questionable news. Facebook did the same thing. And then Twitter banned that account, and that user has joined our site. So what we're seeing is this fake news is actually coming from mainstream organizations. And so these people have no right to lecture us on what is actual news and fake news. So we don't accept this.
And so then how does that work in terms of the platform deciding?
Sure.
Is all news mainstream and non-accepted, or is there?
So to answer the question specifically, and there was a reason why I had to give that precursor, that preface, because fake news is so subjective. What we do on Gab is we say, look, it is up to the individual user to do their due diligence, do their own research. So when you go to Best Buy, when you go to Costco, when you go to Nordstrom or any major chain store, you are not just going there to the shopkeep saying, yes, I'll buy your product. No, you are doing your own due diligence, your own research. When you're buying an automobile, you're doing your research. When you're sending your child to university, you're not just saying, son, you are going to this university and you must become engineer. No, you are doing your own due diligence. So same with news. You are also doing your own due diligence. And what we say to the user is, if you think this news is fake, where there is a political agenda supported by the oil industry or the anti-fracking industry, call it out, downvote it, upvote it, talk about it, get the community involved. And we see many times, for example, we had a bunch of disgusting Holocaust deniers on our site, disgusting Holocaust deniers. And, on the remembrance of the Holocaust last year, there were certain users that were promoting this Holocaust denial. You will not believe this, Michael. People were downvoting these people like crazy. It was crazy. They were getting hundreds of downvotes. People saying, my grandfather fought in World War II. He was there in Auschwitz. He saw what happened in all these camps. Here are the photos. Here are heirlooms of what we saw, the teeth of innocent Jews. The community does such a great job in policing. We don't need to be like Mark Zuckerberg and declare things as fake news and rely on political organizations that are left wing and are getting donations from left wing groups backed by George Soros.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic between the individual and the community in that sense. But what are the kind of medium, longer terms for Gab? I mean, you just opened up to anyone last month. Where's Gab heading from here?
So Gab is working on many initiatives. We have a Gab TV model right now that allows users to speak freely over video and audio, and we'll be opening up that further to the site. We are going to slowly open up APIs to the site. We are expanding our growth and operations to Europe. This is a long-term project. Gab already has international language translation and support, and we will be adding foreign language characters and tools to our hashtag. So, for example, users that want to write in the Devanagari script, which is the script of most Indian languages, we have non-Roman or non-Latin scripts. We're going to be supporting that. So like Arabic characters, Persian characters, various languages from mainland China. We're going to be supporting this. Same with the various characters in Korea and Japan. Gab is having a rapid expansion program into, we're looking at the cryptocurrencies markets and possibly ICOs. We are looking at getting involved in charity. And something that Gabbers are very proud of is our charity work. A lot of our Gabbers donate to wounded warriors. Gab is looking at getting involved behind international aid and development, such as building water projects in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of rural India where there is not even toilets, for Christ's sakes. And we're looking at getting involved behind philanthropic initiatives. And I'd like to go into more detail if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Is that okay with you? Okay, so one thing Gab is exploring is the cryptocurrency market. So there are parts of Africa where people are born without the governments even knowing that they are born. And these people don't get birth certificates. So these people can't even apply for a social security number or bank account to get remunerated. So a lot of the people of Africa are working in odd jobs, or unfortunately, they are, taking into a life of crime or they're going into poverty. And in some cases, there are youths that are unfortunately going to terrorism. And we feel for the people of sub-Saharan Africa. We feel for the people of rural India. We feel for the people in Mongolia and parts of mainland China where there's massive, massive poverty. We forget that the capitalist boom, the industrial boom that we're seeing, the wealth has not been redistributed or distributed to all parts of the world. And Gab actually does have a heart. And we are looking at a cryptocurrency model where users can actually get paid for their work and not have to work in odd jobs. So people can take up jobs. Gab is looking at projects, I guess, 2, 3, 4 years down the road in the microloans industry, where we want to give entrepreneurs globally the right to create jobs and empower literacy programs, environmental programs, and other international aid and development.
So the cryptocurrency would be used to pay volunteers to work on Gab? Is that the idea?
No, the idea is, so we have, for example, Bitcoin. So people use the Bitcoin market to trade and pay each other. So Gab would look at doing a similar project where we engage in cryptocurrencies ourselves. And we're seeing many other cryptocurrencies being created where independent users are coming in, investing in the cryptocurrency market and exchanging this money and putting a valuation, and then paying for somebody's paintings, paying someone's home repair service, someone paying for some bank servicing job in that cryptocurrency. So places in the world where people don't have access to bank accounts, we would help support a model where you could get remunerated without having to go through governments, banking institutions, and who knows, maybe Gab will one day replace PayPal and help independent merchants not pay ridiculous fees per transactions. And Gab wants to be part of that experience where we're supporting independent small businesses, artists, and people in developing parts of the world. We have a very, very ambitious project. We are working on a lot of initiatives behind the scenes. Nothing is sure yet, nothing is certain yet, but this is something we'd like to go into a future direction.
Super interesting, as with the social network, and I'll be watching it closely. I think others as well. Just there's the free speech aspect, but then there's also it's a challenger to the tech giants, right? Google, Facebook, Twitter, and it's interesting to see if it'll take off. So, wish you the best of luck, Utsav, and thanks so much for taking the time out and coming on the show.
Thank you, Michael, for your time. And I'd like to say to the people of Denmark and the people of Sweden and people of Greater Scandinavia, you are more than welcome to join Gab. You do not need to fear your governments. You do not need to fear this monopolization of political views. You have choice. I want to pay my personal respect to the people of Sweden for creating Volvo, for coming up with the Bofors, for coming up with so many great technological innovations for humanity. And we don't want these great ideas to be stemmed simply because they're either politically unpopular, politically incorrect, or some corporation or government is running it. We want the people of Scandinavia to join our site freely.
And if they do, they have to follow the podcast, right?
Absolutely. Why not? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I've just been speaking with Utsav Sanduja, Chief Communications Officer and Global Corporate Affairs Director for Gab. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media Politics Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and thanks so much for tuning in. If you'd like to connect with us, remember you can follow us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast, also on Gab at SMNP Podcast, and swing by our Facebook page, facebook.com/Social Media and Politics Podcast. Until next week, I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.